Greetings all, Ferrari601 here. Last week, as a successor to their already resplendent McLaren MP4 VRC released this, the 2007 Ferrari F2007 for Assetto Corsa. As a stablemate to the MP4 this car, of course, also from the 2007 Formula One season, it was the MP4 chief rival and chief competitor, and, as we talked about in the MP4 review, its chief design blueprint. However, VRC, as they have done with the 422, have given us an absolutely immaculate rendering of Ferrari's 2007 World Championship winning Formula One car, and what a joy it is. Just as we did with the 422, just have a look at this thing as it begins its first rotation here in showroom view. Just look at that modeling. It's glorious in every possible detail. It doesn't quite have the same pop as the 422 simply because the Ferrari is, of course, Assetto Corsa, and the 422 has that very highly polished silver paintwork, but the quality of the modeling, the shapes, the textures, the relative sizes of everything, it is just absolutely spot on. Good job, VRC, once again. You have not disappointed. At any rate, before we get into talking a little bit more about this car, in its technical details and its competition history, first a little bit of business. I apologize to all of you that this video is a little bit long coming. Please understand that every week I have a very narrow window in which I can actually devote time to making videos, especially these that require voiceover work and a lot of editing. I have the sort of day job that requires my total attention during the week. I'm an administrator at a university and I'm in charge of running a very high-profile program over there, and it requires concentration and it requires that I invest all of my working time into it. So I do apologize that this video is a little bit delayed. However, here it is, and I hope it is enjoyable for all of you. Now, on to the F2007, its competition history and technical specs. It is, of course, Ferrari's 2007 Formula One car. It managed to win the Constructors' and Drivers' Championships. That Constructors' Championship win, of course, potentially we can consider it a little bit hollow due to the Spygate scandal and McLaren, of course, being disqualified from the Constructors' Championship, but the driver's title for Kimi Räikkönen was not hollow in the least. He managed to win it in the final round in Brazil after Lewis Hamilton threw his McLaren off the road in China, and the rest is history. World champion Iceman. The F2007, it is the logical progression of the overall design philosophy that Ferrari had been employing really since the F2002, all the way back in 2002. You can see that the overall plan of this car, it is very similar to the F2002 and all of the other cars that preceded the F2007 in that time. It is pretty much the zenith of that design philosophy. Of course, that culminated on the F2008 in the following year, but you can see the overall plan. It is a logical evolution of things that Ferrari came up with starting in 2002, and it just came to fruition here in 2007 and, of course, in 2008. The technical specifications, it is, of course, a Formula One car. That means it's got a carbon fiber honeycomb tub made out of all sorts of composite carbon and plastic and resin materials. It is interesting to note that this was Ferrari's first zero keel car. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. However, your suspension otherwise is very conventional with your wishbones and push rods mounted front and rear, as you can see, actuating the suspension in that vertical moment of inertia, as you can tell there. In terms of the engine, this is the second year that Formula One used the 2.4-liter V8. For this year, the engines had all been homologated, revving to 19,000 RPM. That was the rev limit that was instituted in 2007. 2.4 liters, about 750 horsepower. The V8 engine with a 90-degree bank angle, mounted longitudinally, midships, of course. The gearbox 7-speed semi-automatic paddle shift. 2007, also the first year in which the quick shift or seamless shift technology became ubiquitous up and down the grid. Williams trialed it in 2006 to great effect. 07, everybody copied that technology. That gives you upshift times, shall we say, sub 10 milliseconds. The actual shift times, of course, are still highly guarded technical secrets because a variation of this design is still used in Formula One today, but quick shift, seamless shift, whatever you want to call it, changes gear, at least in the upshift direction, much more quickly than you can blink your eye. Shell providing the fuel and oil for this car, and of course it ran as all the other cars in 2007 did on these homologated controlled Bridgestone tires. And of course, you can see they are grooved, as was the modus operandi in Formula One from 1998 to 2008, before slicks were reintroduced in 2009. Competition history: the car was driven by Felipe Massa and Kimi Räikkönen in 2007. Kimi Räikkönen, of course, winning the Drivers' Championship that year. Over the course of 17 races contested, the F2007 took 9 victories, 22 podium places, 9 pole positions, and 12 fastest laps. The car debuted at the 2007 Australian Grand Prix right at the beginning of the year, which was a little bit of a change of pace for Ferrari as they were going in years gone by. Starting in 2002, Ferrari did not quite have the next year's contender ready to go at the start of the season. In 2002, the first couple of races were contested by a modified version of the F2001. Same deal in 2003, where the F2002 contested the first couple rounds of the season. And then 2004, the F2004 was ready. But 2005, again, the F2004 was called up into action in the first couple of rounds of 2005 before the F2005 was able to come into service. So interesting, Ferrari finally got their act together with getting the car ready for the start of the season in 2006, and then that continued from then on to the present day. Very cool indeed. A little bit of unknown, perhaps obscure Formula One history. In terms of what VRC have done, we touched on it already a little bit, but let's get a little bit closer and just have a look at what's going on here. The spec that you see on this car represents pretty much its final iteration in the 2007 season. At the beginning of the year, the car debuted in a slightly different specification. You'll notice these canard wings here, front midships. They were not on the car for Australia, nor did it have this sort of proto-shark fin engine cover at the first round of the season. It had just a very traditional looking triangular engine cover, very similar to what we saw on the F2005 and the 248 F1, but a little bit later on in the season, Ferrari came up with this spec, which of course improved everything all around and brought them a little bit more parity with McLaren. Looking around toward the rear of the car, you can see VRC's incredible modeling work here with the turning vanes and flick-ups going every which way on the bodywork. These cars, of course, were very aero-sensitive, and they represented pretty much the zenith of the overall aero philosophy that started in Formula One in 1995, and continued all the way up to 2008. Moving around to the rear here, you can see that great texturing work on the tires. You can see, of course, the Bridgestone lettering, but you also have the emboss marks on the sides of the tire, on the sidewalls here, radial, and then you can see some text and numbering there. I can't quite make it out. Let's see, made in Japan, and that's about the only other thing I can make out on the sidewall here, aside from the barcode, which was also very important in that year because you had some very stringent rules in terms of which tires you could use when. So the FIA, of course, being the ever-present Formula One police, needed to make sure that teams were not trying to dupe them by swapping out tires when they shouldn't be, so hence the barcode there. Moving to the rear of the car, you can see the aero treatment here. Big diffuser, of course, as we were used to seeing in those years. Multi-step diffuser as well. You can see these small venturi tunnels along the lateral areas of the diffuser on the low sides, and then of course you have this big central tunnel in which the starter hull is integrated, as well as the gearbox casing and the rear crash structure. Absolutely wonderful work here done by Ferrari's aerodynamic design team. Here we can highlight basically the only feature that we can interact with on the car, at least in showroom view, and that is the rear rain light. As they did on the MP422, VRC have done a great job integrating that. You can see that in its lit and unlit states, all of the bulbs line up with each other, and it's just a really cool detail. This light does come on, of course, when you enter the pit lane, and of course in some other conditions it does come on as well. Moving midships here on the rear bodywork, you can see the double exhaust there coming out from the V8 engine. So menacing in their appearance, I must say. I would not want to be stuck behind this car for a very long time on track because it just looks a little scary. It kind of looks like this otherworldly creature that means business. Interesting. See this great modeling here of these louvers along the back top sides of the side pods there. Of course, trying to exhaust that hot air from the radiators and a little bit from around the engine bay as well in that lower side where you can see the black bodywork. Very nicely done, very nicely detailed. And of course, on the other side, the right side of the car, where it's not quite as well lit, you can see some great reflection detail as well. Very, very nice. I mentioned the suspension layout on this car, zero keel. Those of you who were watching Formula One back in 2007, around that time, you'll remember this zero keel term. And it was really the first aero revolution that Formula One had seen since these regulations came about, starting in about 1995. Zero keel means that the lower suspension elements are mounted directly to the chassis rather than having an appendage sticking out of the bottom of the chassis. And if you look underneath the top element of the front wing here toward roughly lower center of screen, you can see the bottom of the nose section of the car where the monocoque starts to come in after the point where the front end attaches, the front wing and nose cone structure attaches. You can see the lower suspension elements are mounted directly to the chassis. That is zero keel. A keel on a modern Formula One car means that there is an appendage coming down from the bottom of the chassis to which the lower suspension wishbones or A-arms are mounted. What Ferrari and a few other teams in 2007 were doing, and a couple of teams I believe experimented with this in 2005 and 2006, Ferrari said, no, we don't need a keel. We're just going to modify the suspension geometry such so that we can mount them directly to the bottom of the chassis, therefore eliminating a little bit more drag and, more importantly, allowing more airflow directly to come in underneath and through the spoon section of the front wing. That's the lower section of the front wing that curves down toward the road surface, and funnel that air into the T-tray or the tongue, whatever you want to call it, this center section in the front end just behind and below the barge boards that you can see there. We want to funnel as much air as possible into that T-tray area so that we can feed the diffuser and, of course, feed the side pods. So zero keel, the suspension mounts directly to the bottom of the chassis and it frees up some airflow underneath the car. Very cool idea, and this was the first Ferrari F1 car that raced this solution. Very nice. There were some challenges integrating it. They had to greatly modify their front suspension geometry, and of course the front end is also where all of your steering and most of your braking load goes in, so making sure that the front suspension still has the integrity that you want in terms of stiffness and just overall resilience. You have to make sure all of that is going to be taken care of before you implement a zero keel construction, but Ferrari managed it in 2007, and now all the teams are using zero keel. I've not heard the term keel associated with a Formula One car since about 2007. So there you go. Aero revolution. Again, the development pace of Formula One, it is absolutely relentless, and here it is, the zero keel for the first time on a Ferrari. Very cool indeed. Looking midships toward the cockpit, you can see some great detail in here. And of course we can go into the cockpit. We'll do that right now, and we'll give you a sense of what this thing looks like in terms of its proportions from the driver's seat. The eye point in here is very high in showroom view. We will not be driving the car from this high up. However, you can get a good sense of how things are laid out in here. It is very similar to the F2002 and the F2004. Undoubtedly, all of you are familiar with those cars in Assetto Corsa. Of course, this car being very closely related to them in terms of its overall design, and of course, they're Ferraris as well. You can see that there's a lot of similarity between the F2007 and those predecessors. However, because technology continues to advance, we have a lot more information coming to us from the steering wheel. You can see everything is blank because everything is switched off in showroom view, but you can see all those boxes on the steering wheel. They're going to give you information about lap time, your lap delta, speed, gear, oil temperature, oil pressure, water pressure, all of that good stuff that you need to know about how the car is functioning. All of that's coming at you from the steering wheel. You can check out all sorts of things with barely a glance. Looking around the other sides of the cockpit, you can see some other controls very similar to how they are set up on the F2002 and F2004. On the left-hand side of the dash there, you have the button for reverse rather. There I go transposing words again, but you've got the reverse button there. You have the button for the rain light, the ignition kill, the fire extinguisher, and all of that good stuff. You can also see here on the left-hand side of the bulkhead the Ferrari chassis plate and the FIA homologation sticker. That's just for your safety certification saying that the chassis has passed its crash tests and all of that good stuff, and it is cleared to race. Over on the right-hand side, you can see this lever. Looks like it's a brake bias adjuster here. So you've got that bluish-green knob on the extreme low right side. That's for brake bias. And then I believe the lever is for adjusting that brake bias in predetermined steps, just so that the driver doesn't have to be twirling that little knob around as he's going around on track. He can have presets in there, and then he can just transfer directly between them as he's going from corner to corner. Of course, this car, even though it was driven by Raikkonen and Massa, certainly it had a lot of design input from Michael Schumacher. Schumacher, he retired for the first time from Formula One in 2006, and you can definitely tell just from the way everything is located and the setup on the steering wheel and everything, Schumacher loved to play with his settings as he was out on track, and certainly he would have had a lot of fun had he decided to continue racing through 2007. He did some tests in this car to help Ferrari develop it in 2007, so clearly his design influence was still very important for Ferrari. Looking around just visually in the cockpit, you can see some great details here on the seat belts and the cockpit surround. You can see the driver's seat lined with Alcantara, of course, and you can see the stitching in the seat belts. I always love that little detail. And then looking around on the cockpit surround, nice finish on this bodywork. Nicely reflective. It's all very smooth. There are no real sharp angles to worry about here. Very nicely done. And of course, looking at the back of the car here where the driver's helmet sits, you don't stand a prayer of seeing this while you're out on track. But the fact that they bothered to do such a good job detailing all this stuff, it just goes to show you how good VRC really are. Looking here at the air snorkel and the T-bar where the camera's mounted, you can see the camera lens over there on the T-bar. I love the attention to detail that VRC have paid here. Look around the other side of the cockpit, you can see the mirrors on this car. They are extreme outboard mirrors in terms of their mounting. You can't see them at all facing forward. And Ferrari got into trouble for this eventually in 2010. However, in 2007, as they were on the F2005 toward the end of the season, and certainly the 248 F1, the mirrors are mounted extremely outboard. So extreme outboard mountings on the mirrors. It's done for aerodynamic reasons. Of course, while he's out on track, the driver could turn his head to see who's behind him, but the FIA eventually took a dim view on that, I say rightly so, so Ferrari had to return to mounting their mirrors more conventionally on the actual sides of the cockpit rather than on the side pods. But Ferrari were doing that for a few years. It worked out for them aerodynamically, so of course the F2007 had those mirrors mounted where they are. Leaving the cockpit here, and just taking one final look at the car in showroom view. Just caught sight of another little detail that I hadn't noticed yet. You can see the main canard wings on the top side of the chassis here midship, but you can also see these smaller canard wings that are mounted at about 45 degrees just below and to the right of the Ferrari Scudetto, the shield logo there on the side of the car. Looks like they're funneling air toward the radiator inlets, and I'm not entirely sure if there's any interaction with the flow coming off of the canards, which are also angled slightly downward. I'm not entirely sure if they're trying to attach some of the spoilage that's coming off of those canard wings and then bring it into the side pod, but I just caught sight of that little detail. So intricate these cars were that I can still notice details even though I've been driving this car for about a week now. So absolutely incredible work, and again, hats off to VRC for doing such a great job at noticing those details from whatever photographs and videos they're watching to make these models happen. But absolutely lovely job. I cannot thank you guys enough. In terms of the on-track portion of the review today, we have to go to where Ferrari clinched the 2007 Constructors' Championship, Spa. So we will see you at Spa in mere moments. Welcome to Spa. Before we get out on track, we're going to have a look at the setup screen as always to show you what the default setup values are. Car status here, you can see the live stats of how everything is sort of bouncing around here as the physics engine continues to account for the acceleration of gravity at 9.8 meters per second squared. So you can see the camber and toe values are fluctuating ever so slightly, but that's how everything stacks up from the default. Under gears, of course, we have your gearbox 1st through 7th gear. You can adjust these in any way you like in addition to the final drive ratio. Tires, you've got your choice of tire compounds ranging from hard, medium, soft, and super soft. The super soft's really only good for qualifying and maybe some very short low fuel stints during a race. Otherwise, most of your running's going to be done on the soft and medium compounds. The hards really only if you're in a bad situation, so you've had an incident at the start and you want to push it long into the Grand Prix, that's when the hards are your friend. Of course, Bridgestone were at their discretion to issue whichever tire compounds they wanted for a given Grand Prix weekend. Your tire pressures you can adjust. The default value is 10 psi, goes all the way down to 8 and up to 12, so actually not that big of a window in terms of tire pressure adjustments, but between 8 and 12 you can adjust them any way you like. Fuel, not a very big fuel tank in this car because, well, refueling was allowed mid-race, so your maximum capacity is 120 liters, and then of course 0 to kill the engine here for our purposes right now. Electronics, here's where you get your traction control and engine braking adjustments. You can turn the traction control off if you would like. However, the cars all ran traction control in this era, so it goes down from off, from 1 to 6. 1, of course, being the most assist, and 6 being the least, in addition to off. Your default value here being 5. Engine braking. This is a little bit of a carryover setting from some other work VRC have been doing, probably on the 2015 Williams car, because that one has the ECU in terms of MGUK and MGUH, so you can see that it's referenced here in the screen here. However, the engine braking does have an effect in this car. The value on the default is 5 out of 8, and you can adjust that any way you like between 1 and 8. Aero front and rear wing. You do not see the flap angles on the wings change here, however the effects are modeled accordingly. Alignment, camber, and toe on all 4 corners per usual. On the default values you can see. Dampers, your bound and rebound for all 4 corners on the suspension. Drivetrain, here's where you have your diff, coast, and power and preload. So all your differential settings you can adjust here. Generic, your engine limiter. This is the rev limiter. It defaults at 100%. It goes down to 95%, and of course your maximum is 100%. You can also adjust your brakes here in brake bias, brake power, and your power steering assist. Suspension, your more detailed suspension layout settings here, anti-roll bars, your heave rates on the front, travel ranges, ride heights, wheel rates, and then of course you have all of the same for the rear of the car. You can adjust this independently in terms of ride height and wheel rates on all 4 corners. So we're going to load my setup here. Not very many changes I have made to it. I've just added a little bit more rake across the car front to rear, so the front suspension ride height is a little bit lower. We're going to put the medium tires on for our run, and we're going to put some more fuel on board just so we don't run out of gas after 4 or 5 laps around this very long racetrack. 65, 66 liters on, that should be okay. And in the cockpit, the lighting here isn't the best because we're in shadow, but you can see all of our information on the steering wheel now coming alive. Top right, you can see our fuel level, 66 liters. To the left of that, you'll see our lap delta once we actually put in a timed lap. Below that, ticking away, is our current lap time. Below that, in the center, engine RPM. We're idling at 4,000, and it goes all the way up, of course, to 19,000. Below that, we have, obviously, our gear indicators, neutral through 7th plus reverse. Very nice. To the left of that on top, you've got your traction control settings. We're on setting 3 right now, and as I adjust the traction control, you can see that number start to tick around. Off is 0, just so you know. To the right of the neutral button, we have 18 there. I believe that's our tire temperatures on the front. Below that, you have your tire temperatures on the rear in degrees Celsius. Below the TC3 on the left-hand side, you can see water temperature at 75 Celsius. And then I'm not entirely sure what that value is below that, LP1. Not entirely sure what that is. I've not really paid attention to it as we're out on track. However, clutch in, first gear, and off we go in the F2007 at Spa. Let's do a little bit of an install here, go up and down through the box a couple of times, and start building those tire and brake temperatures. There's full revs on the motor for you, 19,000 RPM. And we're understeering quite a lot because I do not have any heat in the front end. We're going to fix that starting now. Purposely inducing a lot of understeer here just to get those medium compound tires up to temperature here sooner rather than later. Now we can let the car go as we come back up the hill towards the top of the racetrack. Through Blanchiment, it's already flat out, as you can see. Yes. No problem at all, even on the first lap out of the pits. Still working on brake temps, though. And now to begin our first flying lap. That LP2 number in the steering wheel, I just noticed it clicked up from 1 to 2. That's in the lower left corner of the steering wheel display. That must tell us how many laps we've completed. Problem solved. Eau Rouge at full throttle for the first time. Easy flat, no problem whatsoever. So much downforce on these cars. Just unreal levels of performance. Going flat through Eau Rouge in the F2004, it's possible, but it's a little hair-raising. This, it's no drama at all. Eau Rouge, as awesome a corner as it is, this car reduces it to a mere kink. Alright, that understeer is more or less dialed out now. We've got some heat in the front end. The brakes are coming up to where I want them. We can start to speak representatively about how the car behaves. Into Pouhon. Little bit of a dab on the brakes and some tickling the throttle going through there. Your apex speed on a really fast lap is north of 165 miles an hour. There's a funny chicane, lots of feathering on the throttle there. Then coming down to Stavelot, where the old Stavelot Road comes into the racetrack, and we rejoin what Spa used to be back in the day, that super long, super perilous course on pretty much 100% public roads. That thing must have been absolutely ridiculous. Into the new bus stop chicane. I must say, I do not like what they did to the bus stop following the 2005 race. The old bus stop was really fast. You could just throw the car in there. It was very much like the old Variante Alta at Imola. However, safety and common sense. Down the hill here, popping 7th gear before Eau Rouge. You'll notice, those of you who were astutely watching videos that featured the MP422, you'll notice that I was holding 6th gear a bit longer, actually going through Eau Rouge in 6th before popping 7th at the top of the hill. The F2007 has a bit more mid-range torque than the MP422, thus you can get into 7th gear a little bit sooner and still maintain that speed through Eau Rouge and at the top of the hill through Radillon. All cars understeer through here, but the F2007 takes it like a champ, as you would expect. And then through the corner with no name, you got to watch the rear end gets a little bit light, slightly off camber. The road moves away from you. Things can get a little bit swirly. In terms of driving dynamics, this car, you can definitely tell, had a lot of design input from Michael Schumacher. His driving style was very high energy. He relied a lot on the front axle, and because he liked a very pointy car, we call it, a lot of positive feedback on the front, a lot of initial bite on turn-in, it actually is to the detriment of rear grip. However, Schumacher and Raikkonen, having a very similar driving style, they both like to use any slides that are induced on the rear to help rotate the car through the corner. So the F2007 certainly has a little bit of oversteer built into it. In some of the videos here and on the hot laps later on, you will notice some oversteer moments in some somewhat odd places. You just have to adjust your style for it and then try to convert that momentum into rotational energy in a positive direction so that you can get yourself around the corner. Engine just singing away here, coming up on 18,000 revs down the Kemmel Straight before we brake hard down a whole bunch of gears into the Kung. Holding third here on the power early. See the back end getting a little squirrely there. Even though we've got traction control, it is not very intrusive, I must say. It just cuts the spark enough just to say, hey dummy, too much gas. Very wide there. Got to work on that on the next lap. On the medium tires, remember, I don't have quite the all-out grip that we'd have in a hot lap, low fuel situation. Got to remember that. Into the final chicane. Normally, apex speeds are north of 100 miles an hour easily, usually around 110 to 115. Then into Stabilo. You can get on the power a bit earlier than that, actually. But again, you do have to watch the rear end. In terms of the car's overall response characteristics, it is very positive on the front, as I mentioned, and that was a design choice that Ferrari made in reaction to Michael Schumacher's driving style, and Raikkonen, of course, very used to sliding around on the rear. Being from Finland, I think driving on a lovely summer's day in Finland involves some oversteer, so Raikkonen had no problems with that. Massa was a little bit on his back foot in 2007. He certainly was playing the same supporting role for Raikkonen as he played for Michael Schumacher in 2006. However, Massa having a few flashes of brilliance that year as well, and certainly he was an integral part of helping Ferrari to achieve that Constructors' Championship, albeit with a bit of help. Straight line speeds, you'll notice they're higher in this car than they are in the MP4 We're going to hit 197, maybe just touch 198 as we break into the Cum. MP4 does that down the Kemmel Straight about 192, 193. So a little bit less all-out top-end power in the MP4 However, I will say that the 422 has a bit more downforce, so some more drag being induced there, thus lowering your straight line speed. The gearbox in this car, just like the MP4 and just like I'd imagine any other 2007 era Formula One car, unbelievably responsive. It is so quick. You pull the paddle, and before your fingers have even returned to the wheel rim, you are in gear. So much performance, so much responsiveness there. Your downshifts are also seamless. You get an auto blip from the engine there, so you don't have to worry about rev matching for yourself. There's no way that you could possibly rev match as quickly as the computer does it for you. So very nice auto blip on the downshift. The gearbox is entirely instinctive. You don't even really think about it. It's just pull gears as you're braking, pull gears as you're accelerating, and no problems at all. You do have to be careful on the brakes, though. The brakes on this car, of course, they are very good, being Formula One brakes. However, the car has a little bit of a propensity for rear locking, so just watch out into the big braking zones like here, into La Source, and into the bus stop. Of course, you can get a sense of what the sounds are like. Very nice job on the sounds in this car, as they did with the MP4 VRC, you guys are masters of sound. I don't know how you do it, but keep doing whatever it is that you're doing, because this is just awesome. Yeah, back end getting a little squirrely again. Again, you just come over the crown of the road there, and it just unsettles the car slightly, particularly as you're coming through that corner, accelerating. You're in that transitional period between mechanical and aerodynamic grip, so the car gets a little nervous. Okay, curving through Wuhan. That'll wake you up in the morning. Just such a nice driving experience in this car. You can totally understand how it won a world championship. It's just quick everywhere. You can hear that compression going through the car. The revs drop ever so slightly as you're at the bottom of the hill, heading up through Rédillon. It's just so visceral. I love it. These medium tires are giving me a little bit of understeer on turn-in. That is the tires. The car itself, very neutral overall on turn-in, but as I said before, a little bit biased toward oversteer as you're coming back onto the power toward corner exit. All right, let's get Pouhon right this time. Yep, that's how it's supposed to be done. Top in 7th there on the exit. Down through Fagnes, letting the traction control do its job. Hear it just rumbling away behind me as it's cutting spark and fuel delivery. There we go, we're up 2/10 on our fastest lap. It's so great. It's just so great. Car's been out for a week or so by now, so please, if you have not checked it out, go check it out. As with the MP422, you will not be sorry. VRC are asking a very reasonable donation sum because it is 0.1 beta. $3 US. Worth every penny. No doubt. Because you get to do this. A second gear through here, a little bit better turn in, but you're not going to be able to deal with that understeer. It just is what it is. Adjust accordingly. I will be forever amazed at just the amount of grip that these cars had. I mean, I watched them race. I've driven them in various sims, but they just change direction like slot cars. It's incredible. 4.5, 5G, sometimes more than that in the corners. These guys are getting absolutely beaten up every time they turn a lap, particularly around a place like this, because so many high-speed corners, they generate so much G-force. The car is just like, yeah, give me more. Hit the sausage curve there a little bit, no problem. Addendum to what I said before about tire temperatures being in the lower right of the steering wheel, those are tire pressures. Of course, the pressures and the temperatures are related to each other. The higher the tire temperature gets, the higher the tire pressure will get as well, but you are seeing tire pressures in the lower right of the steering wheel. Of course, that's going to be in pounds per square inch. Running 20 on the front and looks to be about 21 on the rear. And a little squirrely there under acceleration. Medium tires are a little bit past their prime by this point. Of course, they're still very stable and they would last much longer than our run will be today, but they do lose their newness after about 4 or 5 laps around this place. So again, just plan accordingly. I can feel a little bit more flexibility and certainly consistency in the tires now, but they are past their prime in terms of generating their ultimate one-lap pace. Traction control there, struggling slightly on this setting to deal with that wheel spin. Again, the rear tire's getting a little bit worn. Things are accelerating a little bit more quickly than even the traction control can deal with. So again, just be mindful, and of course as the tires continue to wear out, you'll have to be more judicious with your throttle input, just as I'd imagine you'd have to be in reality. Remember, when F1 was running traction control, the drivers very seldom ran full traction control anyway. They prefer to deal with things manually, because racing drivers do not like surprises, particularly bad ones. So, yes, ultimately the driver is the best form of traction control. Bit of understeer now on turn in. The tires are going off. But all in all, as you can see here, very consistent. You're able to put up decent lap times throughout the course of an entire stint. The car is there for you everywhere. You've got great grip in high-speed corners, like Blanchiment right there. Flat out, no problem. You can even touch a little bit of inside curbing if you want. I don't recommend it, but if you're feeling brave, you can certainly do it. Rear locking there, catching me out a little bit into the bus stop. But if you're aware of those characteristics of the car, you will see that you can deal with them very, very effectively just by tweaking your inputs ever so slightly. Brakes until they cool. On the power as quickly as you dare. It's just so nice. It is so very, very nice in here. But as good as the car is, it does make you respect it. You do have to understand that just like anything else in the world, it has limits. And even though the limits on a Formula One car are much higher than the limits on pretty much any other kind of land vehicle, you do have to respect them, and this car will show you its limits on occasion, and when it does, it shows absolutely no mercy in doing so. If you exceed its limits of grip, it'll spit you off. If you get on the throttle too soon, particularly on low traction control settings or worn tires, it will spit you off, probably into a barrier or into a competitor. So, as with everything else in Formula One, you can get up to the limit progressively, but then once you get there, you must stay there, otherwise you will meet destiny in a hurry. Into the pit lane here at Spa, very narrow pit entry. Always a challenge to get it right, particularly in a race situation where emotions are running high. But back to the pits with us. Did 12 laps. Not too bad for this circuit. And we're going to stop to the left of our pit box here. And just drop it into first for our pseudo engine kill. But there it is, VRC's Ferrari F2007 in version 0.1 beta. Wonderful job. Guys, you've outdone yourselves. The MP422 was absolutely tremendous when you released it in point 1. You've since updated it for point 2. It looks even better than it did before. I have no doubt whatsoever that the F2007 will follow suit in constantly improving with each new iteration that you guys give us. Wonderful job. Please keep up the good work that you guys at VRC are doing, because you're doing us all a tremendous service to be able to take these late 2000s Formula One cars out and try them out for ourselves, because they just have a level of performance that you have to see and experience to believe. Even though we all watched them on television, and all of you who've not yet driven this car in Assetto Corsa are watching my video right now, just drive it. You must drive it. Donate to these guys. They are doing absolutely world-class, highest caliber work, and they're doing it for a very reasonable donation sum, which they wholeheartedly deserve, especially if they're going to continue to give us cars like this. And I do hear that they have announced that they're working on a McLaren MP420 and a Renault R25, both from the 2005 season, the last year for those 3-liter V10s. And for me, my first year watching Formula One being 2005 and the MP420 winning the first Grand Prix that I ever watched, I am so very much looking forward to that one. But in the meantime, with the MP422 and now the F2007 from the '07 season, which was another cracking year, absolutely wonderful. The possibilities are essentially limitless with the situations that we're going to be able to recreate in Assetto Corsa with just those two cars. Never mind when we get the MP420 and the R25. So just once again, thank you so very much to VRC for doing this. You guys are absolutely awesome. Keep it up. As for you, my beloved YouTube audience, thank you very much for your continued support, your continued engagement, and hopefully for your continued understanding for my overall life situation in terms of when I can produce videos. But thank you all so very much for watching, and of course stay tuned, because we've got hot laps to come from the F2007 without commentary. So thank you all very much. Stay tuned for the hot laps. Ferrari Man 601 saying we will see you soon.